All right, I think we're here. So I left my printer in kind of a mess because I was printing with these flexible filaments. So, here's a little piece that I had to cut off because it was all kind of chewed up looking. But they're pretty, this one's not particularly stretchy. It does stretch somehow. Stretch some. There are much stretchier ones than this, but it is certainly flexible. I printed a couple of things. A little belt you can take and invert it if you wanted to. So certainly you could not do that with any of the other filament that we've been using. Actually, we've only been using that brown filament. But still, any of the other filaments aren't going to do that sort of thing. And then I was printing this temperature tower, also flexible. And I wanted to leave it here just because I wanted to show you what happens with a temperature tower if you leave it unattended, and if you leave your flexible filament unattended and you're not certain of your specifications for printing temperature or speed or anything like that. So you can see here, so this one started at 240. We'll actually make we won't make the tower itself. We're going to download the tower, and then we'll go in and set these different temperature transitions in our G code. Because normally when you download one of these temperature towers, it's just the geometry. It might have numbers printed on it, but that doesn't actually mean it's going to print at those temperatures, because your slicer is going to slice it all at one temperature, so you have to go in and manually change it somehow. But here's what happened. So this one starts, let's get a little closer. Where's my zoom? There we go. Oh yeah, you can see that. Starts at 2. Now it keeps flipping. This is kind of a pinkish salmon color. And that thing in the background is all red, and it can't decide what's red and what's not. So the colors keep shifting back and forth. It'll be all right. Anyway, it starts at 240, so pretty hot. That's about as hot as you can print with the Ender 3. This tube, and then down inside the print nozzle is a liner tube of a similar material, PTFE. That's Teflon, basically. That's too much more and they will begin to degrade. Now they can't even last very long at 240. I mean by very long, days or hours, many hours of printing, but still they can't survive much above that temperature. So 240 is where I've started this at. It'll print fine for a while. You can always change the tube that goes down in the nozzle, or not the nozzle, but the hot end. You can change that out if you want to, if you think it's gotten bad. At the end of the quarter, summer course, we'll go in and disassemble our nut. We might have to do it today because it's all clogged up. Who knows? Anyway, started at 240, and it went 5 degrees cooler each time, and then it got to this 215 mark. So it was trying to print at 210 up here, and it did for a while, and then it just clogged. And so I wanted you to see what would happen. So what happens is, obviously, I caught it at some point. This thing's supposed to go up to like 185, which is nowhere near hot enough to print these flexible materials. But anyway, I knew it would clog at some point. I didn't know where. And I left it for a while, and so it clogged. So now in the nozzle is all clogged up. But here's the other thing that can happen with flexibles that you have to be aware of. And it's over here. Right there. Here's the extruder, and since it couldn't push the flexible filament into the nozzle, it just started backing up, and it's all up here now. So this can get, obviously hung on things or whatever, but it's definitely not going to be printing once you see that happening, because this filament is flexible, and there's a little unconstrained path between the drive gear and where it enters the Bowden tube. So we'll fix that by pulling it back out, and hopefully we can get this thing back printing without too much trouble, but who knows. All right, so the other thing you'll see that I did different is I switched out to a glass bed. Normally, or not normally, but lately we've been printing on this PEI sheet, and you can print TPU. This is the material called TPU. It's a subclass of TPE, and it's one of the common flexible filaments that you'll find to print. This particular one, let's see what the brand is. Is this? Can y'all see? Not yet. Gotta get it lower. Gotta unwind some of it. There it is. Got it off Amazon. Preline, I'm not sure. But I guess you could go ask them on their Facebook page. But it's a 1.75 millimeter. They call it orange, but I guess it's kind of orange. But it's not quite just orange. Let's get it back on here the right way. All right, so that's what I've been printing for the flexible materials here. So like I was saying, you can print it on the PEI sheets, but you kind of want to be careful with the surface on these sheets. Like obviously if you scratch this stuff, then you don't have your PEI coating on there anymore. And TPU bonds very well to PEI, so you have to have some kind of release agent, and I just didn't want to put that on the sheet. So what I did is I went and got a picture frame, the glass from a picture frame, and cut it down to fit the bed. It's not hard to cut a piece of glass. There's nothing special about this glass. It came out of I don't know, probably one I got from Walmart or something. I just found it in my storage room over here, and took the glass out of it, cut it in two directions here. Let me show you how to cut it. It's not hard. Well, assuming you have the glass cutting tool. Let's move that. I got a little piece of it left. Let's see. Here's a little piece that's left that I cut off of it. You need one of these. At least that's the only way I know to cut glass. Maybe if you have some kind of other tool, that's okay too. But basically all you do is you make your mark on here. I don't need this piece any particular size. Let's just cut it in half. And it's got this tiny little wheel on the end of it, and you only get one shot at this. You can't really go back and forth, you know, trying to score the line like you would on foam core or something like that. You really get one shot at cutting it, because the chances of you getting back in that groove again are slim, and then you have slivers everywhere, and it's generally not good. So this is a pretty narrow ruler. I might actually want something with a little more size to it. Let me get a bigger ruler, thicker. So this one's a lot thicker, just so that my tool can ride against it better. I didn't want to slip off of there. All right, let's see. You can see, yeah, we can see that. And then you just kind of come across here. You press down pretty hard. All right, and you can probably see that little score line. Yeah, you can see that. That's what you want. You want that score line across there. And then you take something, I don't know, something, and put under it. At least this is the way I do it. So it's right on that line. And then you just tap. The other end of this is a ball. You just tap across. You're trying to fracture that score a little bit more. You just tap across there. And then, normally, you should just hold it down. Make sure your scores, Now, see, I didn't score all the way to the end very well there. So, who knows what will happen at that end. But we'll find out. You press it down, and you just press down. Yeah, it looked okay. But see, it did, that's not quite as straight. A little bit curved up, because it didn't score that end very well. But now I've got two other little pieces. I don't know what I'll do with them. Got two other little pieces of glass. So it's really easy to do. These are not expensive, and as long as you keep up with it, it's not ever going to go bad unless you cut a lot of glass. You have to cut a lot. You do want something relatively firm, like I wouldn't want to cut on this squishy stuff. But again, there might be some other ways to do that. That's just the way I do it. Anyway, back to this. Why I put this glass on here. So the release agent, because this material, it's it's pretty well stuck. In fact, it's separating the part versus pulling it off of here. I'll have to scrape it off of there. So it sticks really well. And if you don't have a release agent between whatever you printed on and the plastic, you're gonna have a hard time getting it off of there. So the release agent in this one, all this cloudy stuff, it's just a glue stick. Just water soluble PVA glue. You can use other things. You can use tape. Like you can just tape across here and print directly on the tape. In fact, in the early days of hobby home printing, that was basically what you use. A blue painter's tape on. I have green, so with the blue painter's tape, you just print it on top of that. Some people use Aquanet hairspray. I guess it's easier to apply, and it's not quite so thick. But you really want the cheapy one, about as cheap as you can get. You don't want any of the fancy stuff in it. Let's see if we can get this off of here, because it is kind of stuck. Let's see. Peel that off. You can probably get this off of here. Yeah. Now the good thing about the glue stick is it's water soluble, so it can get looking really messy and nasty, but you just wash it off with water and it's gone. Now let's see if we can get our tower off of there. Oh, on your glass bed, these cut edges can be kind of sharp, so you normally take some coarse sandpaper and sand them down a little bit just to round them over. Oh, we broke our temperature tower pulling on it, but that tells us that layer, that temperature actually doesn't adhere very well, which is good in our case because that's one of the hotter temperatures and we don't want to print that hot continuously. All right, we're almost there. All right, so let's look at this guy. You can actually see more on here. So there's where it's separated. Actually, it's pretty hollow, so there's not a whole lot holding it together. But we printed 240 for the start, and you can probably see there's a lot of stringy connections between these little overhangs. The overhangs themselves look generally okay. They're a little stringy on the bottom too, but there's a lot of string between, and the bridge has some drooping here, and here. Even there, I would say that the 220 mark across here, it looks pretty sharp. There's tiny stringing. When I printed this, I think I had the cooling fan on. You don't actually need the cooling fan on with TPU or these flexibles. I think I did have it on 100%. Maybe I'll print another one sometime without it on just to see if it makes any difference. But it looks like 220 is probably as good as I want to print. I mean, that looks really nice. Obviously the 210 is not going to work. The 215, I don't know if it's noticeably different from the 220. They're about the same, but let's see what the spool says to print at. The spool says, well, it says temperature 190 to 230, so the 190 is nowhere near it's going to print at that. It does have the base plate, the bed, at 50 to 80. I had it at 0 actually when I printed. I didn't even have it on, which normally you don't need to have the bed on while you're printing TPU. But I would say that 220 works pretty well. Again, now the other thing when you add this bed is I've just clipped it on here so I can take it off with these. I just set it, wow, it's stuck down pretty good. I set it on the magnetic sheet for the PEI. Remember, this thing is glued down, so it's gonna be tough to change that one. But now we can go back to our PEI bed whenever we want to. We can get it on there straight. And we're back to printing with all our other materials. I just didn't want to risk scratching this surface up, having to scrape off, even with the glue stick, having to scrape off the TPU material. Now, when I added that glass, it's thicker than the PEI sheet. Also, it's probably not the same shape. So things we did last time with the um, bed mapping, where we went and probed the map, we did that manually, and so that data only was valid for this particular bed. It might even change a little, when I take the thing off and put it back on. It might change some, but so I disabled that in the G code, and then you have to be careful of the Z limit switch. So what I did is when it went to home for Z, the combination of this plus something else like a ruler or something that's relatively thin, something I'm trying to make up the thickness that I'm missing because that glass sheet is thicker than the PEI sheet. So I just set it on top of the limit switch so it would trigger a little earlier. And since we added the new firmware on our printer, we have an option that's called baby stepping. And what that lets you do is, as you're printing, you can double click the knob and, that's probably double click the knob, and a tuning menu will come up that lets you raise and lower the print head as it's printing, so you can get that perfect starting height. And so I did do that. I used something to cheat a little bit to trigger the Z end stop early so that it would think the bed was a little taller than it actually is. Because it was taller. This is the low height. With the glass on there, it was taller. And then I used the baby stepping to get the height exactly right, because this isn't exactly the thickness of the glass bed. What else do we need to talk about with these? Oh, all right, some settings. So I just used Cura. Let's look at Cura. I don't have Cura open right now. There it is. So I use this generic TPU 95A. That's the Sure hardness, so it's on the flexible side of things. And so this was a built-in setting in Cura. It was in the generic one. So they have some name brand ones. The name brand of this particular one is not among the ones listed here. But some of them have a TPU. There's an eMotion with a TPU. eSun doesn't have one. Actually, maybe that's the only TPU. There's a TPE, which is a similar material to TPU. Or, well, TPU is like a subclass of TPE, I guess. That looks like the only ones that were in there. There's one in there and one in that red. So I just used the generic TPU. So I clicked on that. And, well, let's get rid of that. The main changes are in the print temperature is one. I think it set the temperature to 228 maybe. Yeah, it set it to 228, which according to our temperature tower is, it's at the higher end. It looks like it would actually print better at the 220 range. So I might change that. Build plate, it's got at 0. So the surface itself doesn't have to be heated for the TPU to stick or to perform well. And the other big change is the print speed. You generally, with these printers that have the tube, the Bowden tube here, you generally have to print pretty slow compared to how you're going to print other materials. Because if you try to print too fast, it's just going to back up in this little gap right here and make that big loop that we had earlier. Because it's just too flexible. If you try pushing on it too fast, it's just going to buckle and come out up here. Now, if you have a direct drive printer where this part of the extruder part is basically mounted right above the hot end, then you have a very small unconstrained path. So unconstrained means that there's a gap between maybe the place where the filament enters the hot end and where it exits the extruder. The gap there is extremely small, so you don't have to push it through any tubes or any openings or anything like that. Then you can print a little bit faster. I have a printer. I don't think I can get it out right now. It's just too hard to move. But it has a hot end where there's almost no unconstrained path. You can print flexibles on it much faster if that's important to you. So for instance, this temperature tower was going to take, had it survived, it was going to take 3.5 hours to print it because we were having to print so slow. And so the speed that I'm printing at here is 25 millimeters a second. The default for the filament we were printing earlier was 50 millimeters per second. And you can print faster than that once you get everything tuned in. So the 220, at this speed, 25 millimeters per second, the 220 degree Celsius seems to be, according to our temperature tower, the good combination. Now I've opened up a couple of things here that we didn't see before. So this infill speed, wall speed, top bottom speed, I think initial layer speed and travel speed, they are not normally visible. So if there's a lot of options, parameters that you can change for each one of these that show up by default. This little gear icon, if you click on it, you get a new window of all of these other things that you can enable. Well, they're already there, but you can enable a window to change them. And so there's a lot of them. Now these I did not program in, any of these. Only the 25, and all these others were built as fractions or multiples of that 25. So the wall speed is half of it. The initial layer speed is whatever, 80%, So they're all calculated based on print speed. And so I just wanted to see what they were. So really the only one you have to change is the print speed. It has to be a good bit slower, 20 to maybe 30, depending on your particular material and your particular temperature. If you get too hot, then you get all this stringy stuff. Too cold, obviously it just fails. And so I don't know if you would want to print a temperature tower or not every time for new flexibles, but it would probably help because they are much more sensitive to the temperature than like a PLA or something. Now PLA you couldn't print at 240. It would basically just be too liquid to do anything. But it is going to have a much wider range of temperatures where it doesn't really make much difference how it performs. But it will make some difference. But the TPUs, they have a pretty narrow range where they're going to print well. It might print at other temperatures, but it's only going to print well at a pretty narrow range. Let's see, did I change anything else? I'm looking at my little note sheet here. I think, well, so I didn't change it, but let's see what they set for retraction. Oh, I can't. Retraction. All right, enable retraction. So this is actually a little bit high. So retraction is when you're printing and you have to move in a place maybe back here. So you've printed this corner and now you need to move over to print this corner. Or you've printed one area over here and you're not building one of these bridges or whatever, so they're not physically connected, so you got to move the nozzle without extruding filament. So to do that, you retract the filament a little bit into the tube, so you run the extruder backwards so that it's not dripping everywhere basically as it's moving around. And here they've got a retraction distance of 6.5 millimeters. That's kind of high. It did seem to work. I don't have a lot of stringing at that 220 temperature. But a lot of times retracting a lot, like I would have, if I were building this profile myself, I would have probably put maybe 3 millimeters in there for retraction distance, although it does work. So maybe they know what they're doing. And then the speed I would have kept somewhere in this range. 20 to 30 millimeters per second is a good retraction speed. Too fast and it's gonna make the loop at the extruder. It's gonna try to move the filament too fast, too quickly. And so that's another thing that in this case I did not change it, but you might have wanted to change it. And so how I found this one is I didn't know where it was in all of these options that I had. It was in the travel, but all those numbers weren't right. It just says enable or not. So I just typed in, if you kind of know the name of what you're looking for, you can just type it into the search settings, and then you can see all these others. Now, see, they're grayed out. That just means that they're not, I haven't clicked on them in the options panel to enable them for me to see all the time. But I could change them right now if I wanted to, just by searching for them. Okay, any other things about printing this? I think that's good for now. Let's work on this geometry. So let's say I want to print this temperature tower, and I go and find it on Thingiverse. So let's go over to Thingiverse. Here we are. This is the one I downloaded because it had geometry that already had these numbers going down to 240 and up to 180. I guess it actually went to 180. And I like, you know, I don't want to remember what temperature I printed at, so here it's embossed on the model itself. But that doesn't actually change the temperature. This particular one, I like it because if you look in the summary, whoever built it, this guy, already went in and told you the different layer numbers where the temperature needs to change. So basically you went in and figured out what layer number is between the 240 and 235, and what layer number is between 235 and 230. And so we already did that. You don't have to go figure it out yourself. So the thing about that is you do have to have the same printing resolution. Like if you print at 0.3 trying to speed it up, but he's got it at 0.2, then these layers no longer mean anything, right? So I did print it at 0.2 millimeter layer thicknesses just so I could use these layer numbers. So let me show you what you do with these layer numbers. You go and you download the, well, let me show you another thing first. Oh wait, didn't want to do that, because that kind of changes not what I wanted to change. He does have the G code here already, but it's not set up for TPU, so it's printing too fast. The movements are too quick for TPU. So if you want to print something that maybe PETG, and want to find a good printing temperature for your PETG, you could just download this G code and print it directly. But it's printing too fast for TPU. So we downloaded, or I downloaded the geometry here, the STL file, and I brought that into Cura. So let's get Cura back. And I had it on my TPU profile. Now this is a thing, you have to remember that Cura is going to keep whatever last profile you used. It's going to be the one that's in use again. So if you switch back to PLA or whatever, then you do need to remember to switch back over to whatever generic PLA or whatever you were using before. You can manage your own and create your own materials. But I brought it in here. Let's see. So that looks like it. Yep. And I had it set up for the temperatures I wanted to print with, although I did change and print at I gotta get rid of that. There we go. Let's see, where's our printing temperature? There it is. So since this one starts at 240, I would have changed it to 240 and left everything else pretty much the same. The build plate, you could go in and change the fan. Let's see if we can just find it. Yeah, fan speed. You could turn that off basically if you wanted to. I did not. But sometimes TPU prints better with no cooling fan. That's the layer cooling fan. I just left it on though. All right, so then you slice it, and then you get a G code file. So we'll slice that, and again, it's going to say it takes like 3 hours and 10 minutes, so pretty long time. let's save that file. Let's just save it to the desktop. So I can tell this one apart. Let's rename it just temperature tower. So this one, I could take this file like I normally would and bring it over to the printer on that little SD card and print it. The problem with that is everything would print at 240 degrees. It doesn't have the transitions in it. So to get the transitions in there, we need this because we need his details about where those transitions occur. And we need our file. So let's see, I don't have it open. Let's get Notepad running. And let's open it. And I saved it on the desktop and I just called it temperature tower G-code. There it is. All right. And again, it's all, it's, I don't know, 20,000 lines. No, 60,000 lines of code. We only have to change like 15 of them or whatever though. So here, now that we have an idea of how to read G-code, we can see that this line is heating up the extruder to 240. Then it reports the temperature to the LCD screen on the printer. And then here's the 109 240. So this is the one where it sets the temperature to 240 and it waits for it to actually get there. And then it goes into some homing and all that kind of stuff. What we're looking for though is we want to see, all right, where's layer 45? So I'm going to go over here. No, not there. I'm going to go here and Control F to find layer. Oh, I think it's got a colon 45. All right, so there it is. So we would have had to scroll through 7,000 lines of code to find that. It's much easier to do Control F and type in directly what you're trying to find. After this line, now I'm going to make one change from what he did. He did a M104. So that's the one where you change the extruder temperature, but you keep going without waiting for it to actually change. I'm going to wait for it to actually change. So instead of 104, I'm going to use 109. So I'm just going to go after layer 45, M109. Set point for the temperature now is we're going to drop down to 235. And you could write comments in here if you wanted to. As long as you add that semicolon, then the rest of that line is a comment. And then we go to the next one. So we're looking for layer 81. There's layer 81. And we can M109 set point. We were at 235. Now we go to 230. And then you just keep repeating that process. And then you save this file. Now you do have to do one thing when you save the file. So let's say we've gone through, done all of these. Now obviously a lot of these at the end don't matter because ours didn't even print past the 215. So all of these don't matter for us because it clogged up. So it didn't print most of the G-code. But it did do these. And we didn't know exactly where it would break down, so now we know. To save this though, File, Save As. By default, most of these text editors are going to try and put .txt on the end, which is not what you want. So instead of normal text file, you want to change to all types and erase that .txt so that it just puts the .g code. That way your machine can read it. And then you save it to the thumb drive. Well, not the thumb drive. This little guy. You save it to a little SD card. Put it on your machine, and it'll show up in the LCD screen as a printable file. And you let it print. I can't get the SD card back in. There it goes. No. We'll deal with that in a second. We don't need it right now. Too hard to do upside down and backwards. So just remember that when you're doing these temperature towers, that most of them, unless you download the G code directly, they are not going to slice and have all of those temperature transitions built into them. So you have to go in and manually insert those. And that was the good thing about this one, is that it told you the layers to slice at. Otherwise, we would have needed to go into Cura, go to Preview, get rid of that, and basically, you know, try and find ourselves what layer. So, you know, somewhere in there, he said layer 45, which is, I can't get to go to 45, but right in there. So that is right between the 240 and the 235 layers. And so you could do it that way. If you didn't know, if you found one of these that didn't have a given temperature layer to change at, then you could go in here in your preview mode and drop the slider down and find where you wanted to change it at. So there, 81. I think that's exactly the one that he said to change it at. So you can build these things yourselves. You don't have to only find pre-written G code for the temperature towers. It's not crazy hard to go in and modify the G code. It's just a text file with no. It's not unreadable. You know, it's written in plain English. Well, not like grammar, but you know what I mean. All right. Last time we tried to do what's called PID tuning, the proportional integrative derivative control tuning for the hot end on the printer. So over here, and we were doing that in Cura. Cura does have, you know, on the monitor side over here, if you're plugged in, there are options that are visible, and one of them over in this general area is that you can send G code, but we needed to receive information also. We need to be able to see what the numbers to put in for P, I, and D were going to be. So we could run through the auto-tune routine, but we wouldn't necessarily see the numbers that we wanted to see. So sometimes you want to communicate back and forth with your printer. There's a free piece of software. Let's see if I can find... I think I had it in here. Yeah. So Pronterface.com, the Printrun software. It's a free Python-based interface between your PC and your printer, USB-based interface. So if we go down to download, well, these probably what you want are the Windows binaries, assuming you're on a Windows machine. And you don't want to compile your own version of this thing, or you're not running Linux or whatever. So you could just go here and get one. If you're not sure, there's a README file here that kind of tells you to do the same thing. So in the README, getting Printrun, there's Windows, a pre-compiled version available at, and then here is several of them actually. They're relatively old, a couple of years old, but the newest one is a November 2017 zip file, so that's the one that I'm using. I downloaded that, and let's close some of our extra files here and get over to the one we actually need. Let's see. Well, there we go. That was better. So this is the after I extracted that zip file, this is what's in there. So there's actually a slicer built in here that a lot of people really like to use, and it's very powerful. I haven't used it recently. I've just been using Cura and Simplified 3D, but it does have a slicer built in here. We don't need all of that. It's certainly there available. This is an older version of slicer though. There are newer versions that you could use. Here's the Pronterface.exe. That's the one we want. So we get this screen. See if I can get it all on the screen. There we go. And we need our USB cable plugged in. Let's see if I can get that SD card to behave. There we go. USB. Now, if we want to do anything as far as heating up the extruder, then we need the machine power on also. All right. Because the USB cable is not going to be able to heat up the extruder. So here I've got like a map of the bed. This whole window over here is at the bottom a place I can send G code, and it's going to have a terminal where it'll report any information back to me up here and echo it back. Over here My printer is not on COM 1. Normally mine comes in on COM 8. Oh, okay, it did. So now, do I still have Cura running? I do not. I subconsciously already closed Cura. Most of the time, you forget to do that though. You've just had Cura or your slicer or whatever open and running, and you want to go do something with this direct communication to your printer. That's not going to work. Maybe it's Arduino. You want to upload some new firmware. I think we talked about that when we did our bootloader stuff. You need to shut down all the other communications to your printer. So close Cura completely. Don't just minimize it. Just close Cura, close any Arduino IDE or whatever else might be communicating with your printer, because only one thing is going to be able to talk to it at once. So we switch over to COM 8. This number right here is the baud rate. 115,200 is generally the correct one, but there are others. And let's just communicate at the higher one here. So we're going to connect. Here it is over here connecting. And see, I'm getting this stuff where it's sending me things, but they don't look like anything I know how to read. So that's usually when you get stuff like this, you have connected to it, but the rates that your PC is speaking do not match the rates that the printer is speaking, and so you get garbled text. So let's go back down to the 115,000 and connect again. Now that looks a lot more like, okay, now it looks reasonable. It went in and basically gave me a dump of what it knows about itself, the printer. So the firmware it's running, all these echoes, the echo is something the printer sent back to the PC. Got some memory. There's some stored settings in there. It's running in millimeter mode. The Celsius for the temperature, I guess you could set it in Fahrenheit if you wanted to. These steps per unit, we haven't messed with these yet, but there are a number of steps. So that refers to the stepper motors, the things that cause all the motion on your printer. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about stepper motors in general. But it reports those to us, tells us the maximum feed rate, so how fast can we possibly move based on what the machine is limited to, at least in the software. Maybe if we could figure out a way to move faster, we could change these limits. There's the same thing, but for acceleration. Here are in jerk, which is similar to acceleration, is how fast are you accelerating. So here's that manual mesh bed leveling that we built into it. And finally, here are the PID settings. So these are the settings that we're interested in right now. So what we're going to do is tune this. Actually, the machine's going to do all the tuning. We're just going to input the numbers that it says are the best numbers. And we're going to run through a little routine. Most of it's automated. It should take, I don't know, 5 or 6 minutes or something like that. So it might get a little bit boring, but this is just the way it is. So that's what we're going to do. I do have, let's see, here. Let's go over here. Here is Pronterface. That's the software we're using. You'll see it's called Printrun. Pronterface, I think, is just the interface, and Printrun is the bigger package of stuff. So first we're going to send it this command to turn on the layer cooling fan, because that's usually on while we are running our printer. So 106S, so the set point is 255. Oh, but we need to be in here. So M106S 255, and see if we can change our camera. I don't know, maybe we can change the printer. Let's see if we can get where we can see some of the stuff that's happening. Possibly, I don't know. Oh, there's the fan. All right, so most of what's going on is going on in that hot end right there. So right now, this fan isn't running. Hopefully, when we send this G code, yeah, I don't know if you can pick up that it's running. It's kind of small on the screen, but now it's running. So that's the layer cooling fan. which is normally running when you're printing, unless you're printing ABS or something like that. So that was our first command there. Here is the command for running the PID tuning routine. It's a 303. We want to use extruder 0, which is the only extruder that this machine has. We're going to go, so we're back to PLA printing right now. We're not doing the printing for TPU. If you print a lot in the flexibles, maybe you want to do a tuning just for flexibles. And so maybe you would print this, for in our case, at 220. Now, this C8 is the number of cycles or counts that it's going to do. 8 is probably the number I would normally use, except that it's going to take longer. So let's just do 6. So we'll do this M303. Let's just copy this and paste it in here. But let's change the C8 to C6 so that it doesn't do quite as many. It'll be a little shorter routine. All right, so it tells us that it's doing the auto tune start. So over here, I just clicked on this little temperature map. You can see the blue line is extruder 0. The red is bed. Oh, every time you move off of it, it goes off though. So our extruder is heating up. It's trying to get up to, we said at 200, so it's trying to get up to here. And so at least it gives us, you know, some indication that what we're doing is all right. You could also see on the printer itself, the LCD screen is basically showing you the temperature. It doesn't show you the set point that it's trying to reach. It just shows you the temperature of the extruder as it currently exists. We're getting above 150. And then once it gets up to 200, it'll sit at 200 for 3 or 4, I don't know the exact number, 3 or 4 seconds, and it'll turn off and you'll see it drop back down a little bit. Now it doesn't cycle all the way back down to ambient temperature. It just turns off and cycles down, I don't know, maybe 10 degrees at most. So it's not like it shuts all the way down and all the way back up. That would take a very long time. So here it is. It got a little above 200. So you're going to see it turn off and start dropping down a little bit. There it goes. So it stayed at 200 for a couple of seconds, and now it's off, and it's cooling, and it's recording all this data while it's doing this. And then it's going to, I don't know how far it's going to go down, but something like that. And then now it's picking back up, so it turned back on. It's going to do this, I think, 3 times to get a baseline, and it's going to give me a report of those numbers, and then I ask it to actually go ahead and do 6 times. So there's the beginning of the report. It just popped up over here. That's not the PID numbers though. Those are the temperatures that it reached and at the min and max when it was on and off. So I think I've seen it do at least 2 cycles now. It might have done 3 cycles by now. I had lost track. So there's another report. You can also do this for the bed. It's a M30, I can't remember. It's 305 maybe. We'd have to look it up. Same format, except you don't go to 200. You go to like 60. All right, so here's our first report. So it did 3 cycles, and I've got a P, a KP, a KI, and a KD number. So after those cycles, this is what it thinks the PID should be. Here's what it was before, up here. And here's what it is now. All right, it's done another cycle, and it's kind of fine-tuned them a little bit. I don't know that I want to change these because they're... but I don't know, I can always change them again. These don't make a huge difference. This is more when you're getting into... you've got your printer exactly where you want it. It's in the environment that it's going to be in. and you're pretty sure you aren't going to change many things for a while, you can run one of these and get that last little bit of tuning out of it. Because this is more about keeping the hot end at the temperature you want it to be at. So in this case, it's kind of far above the bed, and you normally are, sometimes you're printing close to the bed, sometimes you're not. All right, so now the printer over here, I need to click to resume, otherwise it's going to keep, echoing busy. And it would just scroll off the screen while we sit here and look at it. So here are the PID numbers that it thinks are, in this current setting, the correct values for PID for controlling the nozzle temperature. They're not far from what was originally there. 23.59 versus 23.18, 1.88, this one was 1.85, 73.92, this one was 72.63. There are coefficients that go into a control equation for when to turn the heater on and off, basically on the nozzle. Like I said, you can do the same thing for the bed. This didn't actually do anything though. This just defined them. To actually store them, whoops, we have to do this, 301. So to store them, we would do M30, whoops, not typing. 301, and then the P, we take the P value here, 23.18. D is, or well, I don't know if it matters if you put them in any particular order, but PID is how they normally are referred to. And then D, oops, not a space, 72.63. So we would send this command. I go ahead and do it. So now these are in the printer currently. But to save them in there on the printer, I would go in over here. Let's see if we can get on that thing. I would go in here, control, my knob's acting kind of weird again. Reset EEPROM, so make the EEPROM able to be stored to. There's another option on it, reset. All right, make that sound. Now see it's, oh, let's send it this command. So those were the default numbers in there, basically. Default numbers are in there. Now, we want to have we want to save these. So we put them in there. M500 saves them. All right. And so we could go in and now have these new values stored in the EEPROM. I'd have to check if resetting the EEPROM actually clears out our mesh bed leveling from last time or not, like all the data for it. I'm not 100% sure that it does or not. I don't know. That's kind of irrelevant for next week, or not next week, next time, because next time we're going to put a BL touch on here so that before every print we can go in and detect the surface. So if it's changed at all, maybe we put the glass sheet on or whatever, it will remeasure every time. In fact, let me go see if I can find the BL touch to show you what it looks like. And here's the one we're going to use. Got it off of Amazon. This one is from Creality. This guy, it has a couple of extra probe tips in there, some mounting hardware. Now this kit actually came with a bracket. I've never actually used one that came with a bracket. All the ones that I've ever used, you just printed the bracket. But this one also comes with some simpler ways to connect it to the motherboard. The last one I did, in fact, I have a video already out on BL Touch for not using any of these parts. So basically you just get the sensor, which is this guy, and a cable, which is like this. So if you just get those, a little bit cheaper, but you do have to go in and you have to cut some wires, and it doesn't just plug in, so it takes a little bit more effort. It's not terribly hard, but it is a little bit more work to do than just plugging some stuff in. Even came with some zip ties and cable for our LCD screen, because you have to interface with that. In fact, I will be interested to see if the way I did it before in the older video, you lose the beep sound on your printer, because basically you use that pin for talking with the BL Touch. So I don't know if this will maintain the beep sound or not. Not that it's super important, but it would be nice to maintain it, but we might lose that also with this kit. So next time, basically this little guy is going to go over here, and it has a probe that will extend and figure out where the bed is at any point. And this is, I like this one the most because it's mechanical. It doesn't it's not sensing the bed through some kind of capacitive change, or lasers or anything like that. It's literally going and touching the bed. So to me, that's going to be the most consistent. The other sensors, actually I have a Prusa printer that uses a sensor that is not like this, and it works really well, but they can be a little bit difficult with different humidities. Even temperatures can make them measure a little bit different. This guy, until it breaks, so the downside here is it has moving parts, so at some point they're going to wear out and fail or whatever, or we'll crash it into something and break it, who knows. But that's what we're going to do next time, so that we don't have to worry about our manual mesh leveling. Now, the good thing about manual mesh leveling is you set it up and you can take your time, because you're not trying to print something right away. You could take and probe the 5x5 or more points on the bed and get a really nice map of the bed. Here, you don't want to do that before every print, even if it is automatic. So this one, we're probably going to set up to do 3x3, maybe 4x4 points on our bed here. All right. I think that's a good amount for today. Let me just check my notes and make sure we didn't skip anything. I think I was going to say one thing about this. So not about this. About this guy. So let's say you're printing something like this, and you actually want this to be a timing belt that you're going to use on something. That's what this would be. This would be around a little pulley somewhere, and not on a printer, but this is kind of small, but it's a little timing belt. So if you have an amount of infill less than, some percent, then these teeth are going to be hollow inside here. One way to make parts stronger is just print with a higher infill, but I think a better way is to print everything as a top layer, because the top layer profile in your slicers is a little bit slower. It's a little more careful about filling everything in. It's not printing it like infill, it's printing it like a top layer, which is more precise. And this isn't that many layers. So basically what you do is in your slicer, you go in and figure out how many layers this is and just set your top layer. Let's see if I still have, I closed Cura because of opening the other thing. But I don't know, maybe that's 50 layers thick. I don't know what it is. But if it's 50 layers thick, then you say that you want to print with 50 top layers, and it will print everything solid, but as if a top layer. So it'll take longer, but it'll be more careful in doing that print, and you'll get a really nice belt. This one I think is fine. These teeth are, they are hollow teeth, but they're pretty sturdy. And I mean, it's nice that it's flexible. They certainly make much more flexible materials than this one. This one's on the harder side of flexible materials, but Wow, shot off of there. But it's flexible, and it's fun. It's a weird color. I don't know. It's not quite the color I wanted it to be, but it'll do. And they're not really any more expensive than PLA. They might be a little bit more expensive, but they're not terribly more expensive. And if I can get this one to print at 220 degrees, then I'm not really worried about any super high heat that's in the nozzle. Once I start getting up to the 240 and certainly beyond 240, then I have issues about the tube that's inside the nozzle degrading pretty quickly. All right, so I think we will come back on Wednesday and get our BL Touch set up on the printer. For now, I got to try and get this thing unclogged because it's clogged up with the filament from when it printed with too low of a temperature. So we'll have to see if we can get that worked out. It's not as easy to do with the flexible in there, but I'm hoping that we can just heat the nozzle back up to 220 or so and push out some of the filament and get it out of there without having to disassemble anything. If I have to disassemble it, I'll record that so that you can see the process of doing that, but I don't think I'm going to have to. All right, we'll see you on Wednesday.